So I will let you go. This is like I have to talk to Anika because this is bothering me. Like why can't you see what's available? That's like that's doesn't make much sense.
Yes, ma'am. This time it's a big problem actually. Like there are other courses in this time, right? If there are seats, then I didn't have to attend this class. I could have attended that class.
Yeah,
So
exactly. And
it's a big
you know,
problem.
like, where your chances are higher of getting, like,
Yeah,
you can,
exactly.
like, i- this class is like, a complete waste. If you're not interested in the topic, then it's not, there's no hope, right? But like, in certain courses, like, it's like Suparna's, 16 and 25. So there is some hope. And also like, let's say Saurabh's course and this industrial thing. If you so let's think about it. Things will sort out, okay? So don't panic and don't worry. So be a little patient. Inshallah, we'll solve it, okay? All right. So let's begin our
Inshallah, ma'am.
labor, okay? So why is this interesting? Labor economics. Why this is a field in economics as like, micro and macro. These are two main branches, right? Micro and macro. But within micro, right, there are certain things that, like, the agent, the who is the principal, like, agent here is the individual or the household or the farm, right? So their behavior falls under the big umbrella of micro. And if it focuses on the labor market, then we study labor economics. In the macro, under the macro umbrella, there are a lot of other labor issues as well, which is one of the most important is the unemployment rate of the country. And then industrialization, right? And then looking at the sectoral employment, right? So you know that in macro you study manufacturing, agriculture, and service sectors, right, making up the GDP, right? So those things. So under each of those, they're like, if it's an industrial distribution of labor, unemployment rate, and like which sector is employing more people, innovation in certain sectors that leads to GDP growth rate. So those labor issues falls under the macro concept, right? But if you are looking at the labor decisions made by the individual or the household or the farm, right? And if the government undertakes any policies that will affect the labor supply decision of individual, we study this under the micro umbrella. So labor economics under the micro umbrella. Okay, do you understand the difference? So it's the same labor economics, but the difference is the agent itself. In micro, what are we studying? We are looking at the decision making process of the buyer and the seller, and we're looking at the farm. So now again, if you are thinking about labor market, there is a person who supplies labor, right, who works for money, and there is an employer who produces things, who hires this labor. So basically they are the buyer. The farms here are the buyer of labor services, and individuals are the sellers of their labor hours. So I am actually a seller. I sell my labor hours to AUW, and in return AUW pays me. So AUW is the demand side and I am the supply side. It's the same as the principles or in the intermediate micro that you have learned, but we are just applying it to labor economies, and we are just flipping the roles. See, before, like, most of us, we thought that we are consumers. It was easier to ask for us to think that way. Now it would be easier for you to think if you consider yourself is the supplier of labor. Okay. Now, why do we study labor economics? Okay, everyone, you're studying, like, and then so much worried about courses and all. Why? Because you want to graduate and you want to go into the real world and find a job that interests you, and the job that, like, you will get that job using the credentials from AUW, all the courses that you have taken here, all the skills that you have learned. You are going to sell those skills, right, in the market, and in return for your service, some employer is going to give you some remuneration, some salary. Okay, so people, everyone in the world, right, formal work or informal work, whatever work, type of work, they need to sustain themselves. As a result, they need to earn money. So they are spending their time and energy in the labor market. Any field you can think about that. Even if the people who write novels, right, they are writing, and then some people will read it, so they are supplying their creative work. and to produce that work they have to work, right? So they are spending their time and energy. So anything you can think in the world, there are two sides again, demand side and supply side. But here, the vast majority of the people are suppliers, and the farms are actually the demand side. Okay. And labor economics, we studied the policies and the principles that govern the labor market. If you think about principles, the comparison, the parallel with principles of micro, if you like, think about like, the tax, the minimum wage rate that we talked about, right? When we talked about price ceiling and price floor. So those things are actually going to affect the labor supply decision, right? The unemployment rate and the particular industry that we're talking about. So the policies that govern the labor market, those are very interesting. And then we can see how the demand side and the supply side are affected. So that's why we need to know, like, study labor economics to understand those mechanisms. And then yesterday at our introductory class, we talked about many social and economic problems, like the social problem, economic and cultural problem, right? First of all, we talked about discrimination, because AUW is a kind of like a all female, all girls school. So we are very much focused on our rights as women, how we are discriminated, how our rights are violated. So these we understand. Part of it is economic, right? Part of it is social and cultural. So the men are the family name bearers, right? So they have the same family name, and our society dictates that when women are married off, they take the family name of the husband. So they discard their own family name and go on to become the family member of their husband's family. So they are no longer like, they are legally, they are no longer a part of the family. Even in certain countries, like, the women, the daughters do not have any right in father's property. Okay. In Bangladesh, if you're from a Muslim family, then the daughters get only 1/3 share and the sons get 2/3 share. Okay. If you're a Hindu, if you're from a Hindu family, if your father doesn't, like, give you anything by written will, right, you will not receive anything, right? And in Muslim families, if the, like, if the father doesn't, like, say anything, and this family has only two daughters or only one daughter, then the uncles, that means the father's brothers, they can also deny this daughter any share of the property. So this part is cultural and legal, right? And this is coming from the, like, the psyche of the people, because the men are the family name bearers. So the property, if you give it to the daughter, it will go to some other family, it will not stay within my family. So that's why they have this sort of negative attitude towards investing in girls, right? And also they understand that if they invest in sons, the sons will always be part of their family, and they will, the income that the sons will be earning, the family will get a share of that, as long as the son is alive and the parents are alive. But if the daughter is married off, right, there is a chance that the in-laws and the husband might not allow her to support her own family. Okay, so that's why the parents are reluctant, because if she earns, the money is not going to come to my family. So if there's no need for her to send her to a really top school, because with top school degree she will get top, like, really good salary, but it might not come back to us. But if I send my son to a top school, he will earn really like really high salary, but it will come back to us. So that basically affects, like, the affects the decision making within the household. That why parents, because parents love both children, they are a gift of God, so they love their children equally, but then why do they discriminate? Okay, so part of it is social, part of it is cultural, and part of it is actually economic problem, because they look in terms of, like, future. This is like insurance mechanism, because in developing countries there is no insurance, so they rely on the support of their children when they become old, right? So as a result, the son becomes very important variable, and son's education and son's labor market skills. Uh, that's why they discriminate at the beginning. Okay. So these are certain things that we will talk about, and then we will talk about, like, the discrimination in the labor market as being a woman, because of our biological clock, right? You are supposed to, like, have your child how many children, if you like, however many children you want to have, you should have them by 35 years of age, which is the most productive career building age for women. After 35, you already have settled into your career, right? All you can do is, like, basically, like, move up, but the rise is not going to be as steep because you already have reached a mid-level career. 25 to 35, this is the most important time for a person's career, because this is where this 10 years will dictate where you will go. But these 10 years is the most crucial, because you have to take breaks. If you have a child, if you have made multiple child, you have to take multiple breaks, right? Maternity leave and all. Just to give you some idea, in the US, right? So all the universities, when they look at every year the college graduates, the percentage of female graduates in sciences, I have plenty. Hello, Diba. Thank you. So, so when they graduate, the percentage of female graduates in sciences, right, is way higher, significantly higher than men. But 10 years down the line, when they look at the employment sector, women in like, STEM research and STEM sort of industry is negligible. There's no one, right? So women who are like, are majoring in sciences, they go into mismatch sort of career. Either some of them go into teaching, where at least they use their skills, but most of them go into banking or some place where their skills, that the amount of effort that they invested in has no value. Okay, so they are basically wasting their skills in occupations that, like, may be suited for their social life, but not suited for their human capital or their labor market. So there's this mismatch because how things are going. So you'll see that in certain countries, even in Korea, in Japan, right? These countries, because they have the Asian mindset, right? Very traditional sort of mindset. But what is happening, because these drawbacks pull these women down, they are not getting married and they're not having children, right? So that's why it's becoming, like, a huge problem, and it's very difficult to find brides, right? In these countries, so they are trying to get, like, the Thai, or like, people from Philippines, so they look alike, so their culture and then the physical features are very similar, so they are trying to get brides from these countries. Do you understand? So this is very serious, right? The future of the country is being affected because these women are discriminated against in the labor market, and not everyone would want to sacrifice, like, their the motivation to strive to, like, reach the top. If you have the skills, why not? Why would you have to give up, whereas your brother doesn't, your husband doesn't, and you have to, right? So this, it's not acceptable to some women, and as a result, these problems are arising. Okay. And the divorce rate is rising because of this, because, like, obviously, as a human being, how much discrimination can you tolerate? So these are certain, like, really serious concern. And then we are going to look into the prejudice of the employers, how the employers discriminate. Okay, so we will talk about how the families discriminate, and then we will talk about how the employers discriminate, right? And then we will talk about, like, labor market and mobility within industries and all that. So these are all covered by labor economics, and these are very important aspects that you should know. As an econ student, you should understand, like, how decisions are made and what causes people to kind of flock into a particular, like, why are you taking particular courses and not others, right? You'll see even in AUW, even if there are seats available, sometimes you prefer certain courses, sometimes you don't prefer certain courses. There is a reason for it, right? So the same sort of thought process applies to labor market as well, and that's why we have to study this. Okay, so they're the participants. Okay, like principles of principles of micro. You'll see that there are two sides, right? The sellers and the buyers. So the sellers look for the best jobs, right? So that they are selling their labor hours and their efforts, and looking for a job that will provide them with very good remuneration. And the farms are looking for their profit. So the farm side is the demand side. They are employing these workers. They are hiring these workers for their labor hours and producing something to make profit. Okay. And then government uses regulation so that, like, the workers are not exploited. What is happening in Bangladesh, we think about the garments industry, right? These women are exploited. They work, like, very long shifts. With overtime, they get in, they punch their card at 7:30 or 8, right? And they get out at 10, right? Not only in the garments industries, like, in the medical sector in Bangladesh, the cleaning persons, right? The nurses and the cleaning person, especially the cleaning person, they punching at 6:30, right? And they get out at 10. Okay. They work really long hours. That means, and for a meager salary of like 7,000 or 8,000, if they work overtime, that goes up to like 12,000. So for 12,000, these people, these women are working like extremely long hours, almost 16 hours or more. Unthinkable, right? So government sometimes intervene in the market to ensure that these people are not exploited, especially the unskilled workers are not exploited, and they are paid the fair share of their, like, they are paid fairly. Okay. And there is occupational safety, that's very important, which is not a part, like, we didn't talk any of this in our principles class, but this is important because occupational safety is important in labor economics, right? The workers, right? The labor, we are basically in a product market. In principles of micro, when you go to the market, the buyer side, they give money to the sellers, right? And then they purchase the product and then consume the products, and they become owners of the product. I buy a pair of shoes and then I become the owner of those shoes. But in labor market, no one owns anyone, there's no slavery, right? All we do as labor, like the workers and laborers, we basically sell our labor hours, but we don't sell ourselves. Okay. So that's one of the difference, right? And because when the wage rate goes up, right, when their wage rate goes up, we have more incentive to work longer hours. So labor supply curve is upward sloping, like the um, supply curve in principles, but there is a little bit difference. So there, if the price went up, like as long as the price is higher than marginal cost, the supply curve was upward sloping. Here, it's not necessarily that, like, if the wage goes up, the supply curve is going to go up. It will go up, but remember, we are constrained by 24 hours. So even if they pay, like, a huge amount of money, after a certain hours, I cannot work, I need my rest. So then with higher wage rate, the labor supply curve will bend backward. So this is again a unique feature of labor market, that labor market, the supply curve is initially upward sloping, but eventually when the wage rate is significantly high, it will be downward sloping. So it will bend backwards. We are going to cover this in detail, but I'm just highlighting how it's different, right? So did I miss anything here? Okay. And then farms, they decide to hire and fire, like, because they want to maximize their profit. So what happened? The corona times, lot of the industries are closed, right? They're not producing anything. So they, like, fired a lot of people. The companies are operating in a very minimum level scale. So they hired, like, only the people they required, or kept the people they required, and they let go of a significant share of their workforce. Okay. Because their motive is to maximize profits, and they're not going to have people work for, like, they pay people who cannot come in and work because of the pandemic. Okay. All right. So the motive of the farm is exactly like in principle, that they want to maximize profit. And the demand curve is, if the wage rate is very high, obviously the farms are not going to hire as many workers. They will try to substitute with something cheaper, any other factor of production, right, is cheaper. So sometimes it's cheaper to employ a computer or buy a computer or a robot instead of, like, hiring 5 workers, right? So it depends, like, the farm will, if the labor becomes very expensive, the farm is going to substitute. But remember, the interesting thing is that it will never happen that, like, with technological advancement, the farms would only hire robots and let all the people go. The reason is the final control has to be within the hands of a human. Robots can only be like, they are programmed, and the program is written by a human, so they cannot go beyond. They are very efficient. The supercomputers, they're very extremely efficient, and they can do things like, much better. But the thing is, they are limited by the program that that's installed in them. They cannot think beyond that. So creativity is something that only belongs to the human. So this relationship, even though people like, technology is going to replace human in certain sectors, but in certain sectors it can never. One of the sectors is the creative field. Okay, so they can't write pieces of music, right? And so they can copy and they can mix and match, like, but they cannot create something that is original, right? So these are certain areas that like, they can never replace. Like, think about Apple or think about Microsoft and all that. So these are like heavy tech industries, but still, like, it employs a significant number of people because they need creative thinking. So this is one of the most prized possession one can have. If you're very creative, if you are very, like, if you have skills in that area, you will be highly sought after in the labor market. Okay. And then government, the third party. Remember, the buyer side, the seller side, and the third party was government. And the government, especially in labor market, it imposes taxes on the sellers or in the consumer side. It gives subsidy to the producers, right? So that especially the farms, so that it can hire more workers, especially during the times of Corona. You will see that most of the government around the world gave subsidy or some incentive or some impetus to the farms for keeping their workers, not laying people off, right? Giving them tax break, giving them like easy loans. All these things are provided by the government just to ensure that more people are kept, they're not fired or laid off. Okay, and there are regulations so that people are not exploited, because when there is a large supply of workers and fewer demand, obviously the wage rate is going to fall, the market wage rate, right? You know that already. So in that situation, people are going to work for a very low wage rate with which they cannot sustain their families, right? So in that situation, government has to come in and set their, set a condition that no, to the farms, that okay, you have to pay them this certain minimum wage rate. If you cannot go below this wage rate. Okay, so the farms in that situation have to follow the rules and pay us, like, higher than market clearing wage rate to the workers. Okay, all right. So the three actors in the labor market are workers who supply labor for their payoff or the salary, and the farms who demand labors for a price, right? And their desire and their motive is profit motive. And the third party is the government, which through regulation and taxation and some other policies, right, would try to govern and monitor the labor market so that the workers are not exploited, right? So they want to make sure, like, occupational safety is there, like, minimum breaks are there so that the workers are not exploited. In the garments industry, they make these women, like, unskilled women, work really really hard, like no break at all. They sit and they do tedious work, right? It's the same repetitive work, and it gets monotonous, and sometimes they fall asleep or something. So they cannot do that. So usually the rule is, if you don't feel good and if you feel sleepy, you're supposed to go for a coffee break and walk around or something, but they're not allowed to do that. They're not sometimes allowed to have bathroom breaks, because the bathrooms, there are few bathrooms and they're not hygienic. So these certain things the government ensures, especially for the low skilled workers, that there is enough sort of, like, sanitary and hygienic situations, right? And they have a cafeteria to heat up their food and eat, and they have enough breaks and all that. um, so these are the certain things that are very very important. And also the other important thing government ensures is for females, like, they are not discriminated against, and there is affirmative actions. If you graduate this year, right, next year spring you'll graduate, and you'll start applying, and you'll see that under every advertisement there is one, like, line written that female applicants are strongly encouraged to apply, right? Even though they will say, let's say company X is a equitable agency that hires men and women equally, like there is no discrimination, they would just say that at very end. At the very end, because of government's affirmative action, they will say this line that qualified women are strongly, or females are strongly encouraged to apply. So this is called affirmative action, so that the government ensures that there is stronger female participation in the economy, because it's 50% of the workforce. So if they don't get involved, the economy is not going to grow. So the government basically, through their directive and policies, they ensure the companies have significant female workers, right? So that's the third actor. And so then, like, the difference between labor market and product market. Product market is any market where, like, the from eggs to your hair comb to your makeup to your toothpaste and brush and everything is product, the things that we buy. And the service market is basically, like, the service that you, like doctors and nurses and your shoe shining person, the barber who cuts your hair, and all of those things are service market. So the difference between labor market and product market is that labor services, right, is being rented. So I basically give my hours, right? So basically this is for some money. So the person, my employer has only right to a certain amount of my labor hours, right? But they have no right over me as a person, as an individual. I am selling my labor hours, but I am not selling myself when I work. Okay, there is no slavery anymore. Okay, labor productivity is affected by pay and working conditions. So whether you will work hard and whether you will, like, give your maximum depends on the salary that you receive. If they pay you a really high salary, obviously you want to give more because you do not want to lose that job. So you want to work hard to be noticed by your employer and ensure that your job is secured. But at the same time, you will be happy to accept a lower wage rate if your work condition is really good, right? So just to give you an example, my real life example, right? I When I came to Bangladesh, right? So I joined AUW, and then, like, I was offered a job at Dhaka University, and then also, like, to be a director in one of the research agencies in Dhaka. But I decided to stay back. The reason is I thought that my skills will be best utilized. The salary levels were comparable, so, like, that was not the biggest motive, like, incentive for me. The biggest incentive was the students, because I thought that this is a unique university where I can contribute, which, like, if I go into that research organization, I'll be another researcher, right? But here, being a female professor meant something different, right? Here I have an extra advantage that Moinul doesn't have. Do you understand? It's subtle, it's very subtle, it's not, but there is certain incentive of being a female professor in a female university, right? Whereas wherever I went, it would be, I'd be just another economist. Okay, so that's why, like, it appealed to me. And so that means, even if, like, our pay was significantly cut, my take home pay when I joined 10 years ago was much higher than after 10 years, which is unprecedented. It's not heard of in labor market, right? That now we are being paid less after 10 years than initially we joined, right? But it's just that it's not only the money, but it's also the working conditions, and it also, like, the how you feel. So the overall environment of where you work is very important. The working condition and the environment and the colleagues, right? And the work you do is very important to motivate people. And the suppliers of labor care about the way in which your labor is used. So, okay, if AUW says, Mehrun, you're supposed to work 8 hours a day for us. Out of those 8 hours, you can teach for 6 hours, and the remaining 2 hours, you will sweep the floor. Okay, or you will clean the toilets. there's no harm, right? It's a job, and cleaning toilets is okay. We clean at our own homes, right? So this is something, it's not derogatory or something. But you know, comparative advantage, right? My comparative advantage is in teaching economics, not cleaning the toilets, because some people who can clean the toilets, but they would not be able to teach economics, right? I can do both, but I can do this lecturing better. So it makes more economic sense that I teach. So the way my labor is used, I have a say in this. So if AUW for some reason gets angry at me and says, Mehrun, this month you're not teaching, you're only going to clean the toilets, right? I probably would not agree, because I would think, no, this is not my forte. I'm not good at it, right? I'm going to be a terrible, like, cleaner, right? And then I have to bend my back, and I have a back problem. I might not do a good job, right? And then I will get scolded that why didn't you clean the toilet properly and all that. So that means, like, I care how my labor hour. If they say, okay, we own your labor hour, but I might actually disagree to do the things that they ask me. Or if they say, okay, 2 hours you go and, like, anyway, so let's not go into that. Okay, so why do we need a theory? We need theorems exactly like we needed theorems in principles of micro, because we need to understand how the market works, right? And what are the most important factors that influence people's labor supply decisions and the farm's labor hiring decisions, right? And when do the government has to step in? So without a theory, it's very going to be extremely impossible to understand the mechanism. Okay, so that's basically it. And just to give you, just to refreshing your mind, like, about positive and normative economics. Positive economics is the questions in economics that we test with data, for which we can get a test of hypothesis and test it with data and come up with an answer, right? And normative economics is someone's value judgment, right? So you can have a strong opinion that there should be no female discrimination, but that's your opinion. Go to an employer, and the employer will say that I cannot hire females because they take maternity leaves and I have to pay them while they're not producing anything for me. They are the owners. What can you do? So your opinion doesn't really count. No one's opinion doesn't really count. So in economics, we are mostly concerned about positive economics, which we can quantify, which we can test. Okay, so this is basically positive and normative economics. Like, normative economics would always have a ought to sign and should sign. The government should do this, AUW should do this, and they ought to do this, right? So it requires some sort of value judgment. Whereas, like, positive economics talks about what is and how you can test it. All right, again, scarcity. Without scarcity, right, economics has no meaning. We study economics because limited resources, right? So scarcity is important, and the other most important is rational self-interest. If you do not, like, if you are not a rational self, where does a baby come from? Someone has a baby. Anyway, so rational, if you're not rational, and that's not a baby smile, I'm sorry. That smile I could not encourage. The baby's cry was very cute, but this smile I don't appreciate. All right, so this rational self-interest motivated agent, that's extremely important, because otherwise, like, if you are very altruistic, the theorems of economics will fall down, right? Or they need a special sort of theorems. The agents maximize their utility and the farms maximize their profit. Okay, so these are basically the, like, the fundamental concepts of positive economics, and without these, like, economics doesn't make any sense. Okay, and obviously we think about a competitive market, which is the most efficient market, right? Which is that achieves Pareto efficient outcome. What does this mean? This guy Pareto is an Italian economist. He came up with an idea that competitive markets are most efficient. It's a situation that you cannot improve someone's situation without making someone else worse off. Okay, so Pareto optimal situation is a situation where you cannot increase someone's welfare without making someone else worse off. Okay, so this is the most ideal situation. All right, so this is again a very important concept. Imperfect information is basically where information flow is not perfect. In perfect competition, information is perfectly distributed, so the buyers and the sellers know every information. But in real life, that's not the case. So we will talk about this. Transaction barriers in real life, like there is no transaction cost. Every infinite number of buyers and sellers, there was no sort of long lines or nothing. There is a price, and there's a buyer and there's a seller, and if you agree on the price, the product will be transacted. But in real life, the product has to be transported from the production factory to the market, so there are transaction barriers. And then if they cross borders, you have to pay governments of the both sides, you have to pay money to them. So there are lots of transaction barriers in real life, which we did not study in our perfectly competitive models. Price distortions, right? I'm sure Professor Monu talked about this when he talked about monopoly a little bit, because the sellers, right, they want to basically change the prices according to, so that they take away the consumer surplus, right? So price distortion is a really, a real life phenomena, because different groups of people are charged differently, so that, the farm can make the highest possible profit. Okay, so that's price distortion. Externalities, I don't know whether you have heard externalities. So let's say, you are a farmer and you are producing, um, let's say you are producing mangoes, right? So for the mango orchard, you have to plant so many mango trees. So you getting mangoes and you're selling them, you're making a profit, but at the same time, the oxygen that your trees are producing, that's benefiting the environment, that's benefiting everyone. So the extra benefit that's coming out of the extra oxygen that your trees are producing are called externalities. That is something extra that is being produced, that it was not the intention, but as a byproduct, which is of value. Okay, of course, clear environment is very expensive and very of value. Public goods are goods, right? Like parks. One person's use does not diminish it for the other person. So unless it becomes extremely crowded, but other than that, it's okay. Capital market imperfections, like obviously imperfections and the price distortions and imperfect information, they all go hand in hand. And especially if the capital market is imperfect, that means some people have access to money and some people do not have access to money. That creates a huge difference, because the entrepreneurs, they need money. Remember, labor, land, capital, right? These are the three factors of production. So if the capital market is imperfect, and some industry owners have access to money and some others don't, in that situation, the industries are going to be different. The entrepreneurs, they have access to money, they can innovate, they can offer higher salaries, they can boost up their production. As a result, they can hire more workers. So there is a link between that and the labor market. Okay, so let's just stop here. I think this is enough. And then efficiency and equity, these are very, oh, this is the last one. Okay. So efficiency and equity, you know that, right? Efficiency is you can produce the maximum amount from the little resource you have. So you are using your resources to its fullest, the maximum gain you can have from your resources. Equity is how you distribute your final output. So think of efficiency is the biggest possible pie you can bake from the flour or the ingredients you have. Equity is how you distribute or how you cut your pies into how many slices and what size of the slices to give to the people in your society. So efficiency is like maximum production, equity is equal distribution, and they are working in opposite way. If you have efficiency, you cannot have equity, and if you have equity, you might have to sacrifice efficiency. Okay, so this is very basic principles that we have covered, but they are vital for labor market. So just we did a very quick revision. All right, is there any question?
Yes, Professor.
Yes, go ahead.
Professor, can you go back to the previous slide?
Which one?
Yes, Professor. Professor, does market failure means the less GDP growth of a country or the less growth of a country?
Market failure, market means the demand side, and the demand side is downward, supply side is upward, right? So the demand side and supply side interacting, crossing, and finding the equilibrium price and quantity. Market failure means that the demand and supply side cannot interact and come to a equilibrium price and quantity. Just to give you an example, let's say the old cameras, remember, now is there anyone, unless you are a professional photographer, who buys a camera? No one, right? Because our mobile phones are, they have better cameras than the ones that the digital cameras we had. Remember these like pocket digital cameras we had like few years back, 2 3 years back, right? We used to have them. Right now we don't need them anymore. Okay, so if you want to sell your digital camera, right, it's a used camera, where will you sell them? There might be some people who actually would buy from you, but so you want to sell and there might be someone who is willing to buy, but you don't know that person doesn't know you, so there is imperfect market. So like, they, because of the information that they don't know each other, the market cannot interact and you cannot come to a, like, you cannot converge into an equilibrium price and quantity. Okay, that that's basically market failure, where there is no equilibrium.
That means, Professor, there is actually no connection between market failure and GDP growth.
Of course, the market is not working, right?
And Professor, if think like that happens, suppose that a black market has developed, and we see that there is a tradition of black market in Bangladesh as well. So due to market failure, this kind of thing happens. But in a sense, these also helps in countries' growth because GDP is at least
Black
increasing, right?
market activity, there's a big problem. That, that black markets or the informal markets, they produce things, right? Whatever, like, the money is transacted, but it doesn't get accounted into GDP because nobody is going to report their income, right? So how will you get, like, account that into GDP? You have to have accountability, either through taxation or through people's income that is accounted for, right? So if you don't have that, then how can you? Nobody, the black market is obviously illegal, so that's why they're never going to explain. But obviously the black market is generating revenues, right? Gambling and those things, right? It is producing something, entertainment for people, and as a result it's earning income, but their income is never taxed, or it doesn't get accounted into the GDP. So you can say, Professor, a lot of people are employed and all that. That is good, but through this black marketing, of course some people are employed, but it also promotes the deteriorates the overall law and order situation of the country. So as a result, basically, the countries that have a lot of underhand dealing and black market operations, you will see that their proper industrial growth is also hampered, because obviously some of it is kind of like, carries through, right? Like the whole culture changes. If the country is severely, the corruption is like, deep rooted everywhere, it affects the overall. So like Bangladesh, they take a Bangladesh, and everywhere you go, there is so much corruption. If you could somehow eliminate corruption, the GDP growth rate would have been much higher. Okay, because these corruptions, like, as a result, this is like kind of wastage. It's just sacrificing your efficiency. Okay, so the corruption and black market is not really good.
And Professor, just to give you an example, recently I have just read from a newspaper, which is Prothom Alo, that is the e-commerce platform eValley, which was on rise, but right now they are being suspected of black marketing due to money laundering. And there are many people who are actually employed in that, in that organization. But already it performed well in 2018, 2019 as well. But since this kind of case has been raised, so how basically will it affect the total market? And since it is now an illegal, it will be turned out as illegal.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
The people who are involved, not all of them are involved in money laundering. So this was a showcase. It's like, you know, you have a, excuse me, you have a store. On the outset, if you enter, it shows that you are selling rice, right? But behind the curtain, you are dealing drugs. Okay. So the money laundering business is that maybe the 1%, the owner of the company, they are doing it. The majority of the people are basically looking at the, like, you know, they're employed and they are the legal side of the business. So any business, there has to be registered and all. So there's a legal part to it, there's an illegal part to it. But the illegal part is actually where the money is being generated. This legal part is just an eyewash for the society. So yes, you are absolutely right. If this is stopped, then these people are going to lose their jobs. But you know, in economics, there are certain things called welfare theorems. Okay, yes, these people will lose their jobs if you close down the illegal activity and all. So this is some loss. So some people are suffering. But if these illegal activities are stopped, right? So this is basically money laundering, means you're taking away the country's money, right? Because it's illegal to take away money and convert it into dollar and take Bangladeshi taka, right? That means the money is siphoned away from the country, which could have been invested within the country. So when you stop these sort of activities, actually it promotes the economy within. So when the economy grows, there will be employment. So there will be a lot of benefit if the money stays in. So if the laundering business, how many people are being employed? But if this laundering is stopped, this whole the amount of money that is being siphoned away, right, could have been invested in Bangladesh. The Bangladesh's money will stay in Bangladesh, and that will be included in the GDP. It will create, like, you know, capital investment, and as a result, the economy will grow, and then it will create a lot of jobs. So there will be job creation. So yes, some people are suffering, but that's a very few. The gain will offset the loss. So in the net, it is going to be profitable if you can, like, you know, stop this money laundering things. Okay.
Thank you so much, Professor, for your answer. Those were very good. And just the last question I wanted to ask, which is that whenever we are talking about labor economics and female employment rate in Bangladesh, that is, we can see right now that there is the female employment rate in garment sectors are surging. So in that case, also the opportunity cost of that employment, which is those women could have taken higher education, but they are not actually taking higher education. They are going to the garments because of their lack of money. So how basically these two kind of things are contradictory, and they are basically
How are they
the relationship. The relationship between the female employment rate in the garment sector with its opportunity cost, that is the higher education rate of women.
First of all, like, you know, of the university graduates in all the private and public universities in Bangladesh, what percentage are female? Not many. And then out of those college graduates, what percentage are actually working? You don't have to go far. Do you guys have AUW, some sort of alumni network, informal, like in Facebook group? Like your sisters, like, you know, the ones who have graduated, you don't
Yes,
have.
Professor.
So don't you see, like, you know, how many of them are actually working and how many of them are married and just raising their family? What percentage? AUW, the focus of AUW is to break the chain that women, now after getting like their degree, will not stay at home. They will work they will contribute positively to the economy. So we wanted to break this cycle, and that's how we are training you. But even after all of this, like, you know, drilling this into your head and all these feminist ideas, what happens? How many of my students, right, who promised me and who begged for 1 point, right? If I took up 1 point, professor, I need this because that will affect my CGPA and then I won't get a job. They would come to my office for this 1 point. What are they doing now? Tell me. All right, not many, right? Because certain other factors are not allowing them to. Okay, so they don't have, like, it's not that they don't want to work, right? Is that there are so many other barriers that is preventing them to work. And for garments worker, is actually they don't have any alternative. If they could have, like, gone to a college, do you think they would decline? No, but there's no earning member in their family and they have to provide for their family. In Bangladesh, it's not in our culture to send our daughters, right, to work. It's heavily looked down upon. But revolution has happened in the garment sector that many families are sending their daughters off, because you know what, the other alternative is to work as a maid, right? So this is again socially looked down, there is stigma. Whereas garments is, it's a formal employment. I am working, it's like, it's a salaried job. Okay, so there is some prestige associated with it, and it's a working woman, so she has a better job marriage market prospect. Being a maid doesn't have any marriage market prospect. So these unskilled women, obviously they have this, like, a strong incentive to work in the garment sectors, because their opportunity cost is all, like, either become a maid or stay, like, at home. So do you understand? So this is the best option for them. They don't have the means to go to a college, right, and a university. All right. And then formal labor market, look at the percentage of, like, women working in the formal labor market. Again, very slim. Okay, because our society, no matter, like, Bangladesh is relatively more moderate than Pakistan or Afghanistan, right? The Muslim countries I'm talking about, even India, which is a secular country, but even the Muslims in India are so conservative compared to us. So relatively speaking, we are little bit, like, but still the social stigma is enormous. Like, why, who sends their daughters to work? Sending daughters to work is looked down upon in the society. Not many parents would proudly say that, yes, my daughter works. The only thing that they're proud of is the daughter becomes a doctor or if the daughter becomes a teacher. Other than that, any other job, oh, she works in a bank. Oh my God, it's such long hours. Like, why? Like, do you really need money that you're sending your daughter to work in a bank? Like, why? It's a male dominated. What sort of colleagues does she have? So these questions will be asked by your immediate relatives. So this is our situation. It's very bad. I hope you guys understand and, like, change this situation. Okay. So anyway, long answer to your short question. Is there any other question? I'm sorry, I'm hungry, I'm starving. I started teaching at 3, right? Continuously talking. So I'm just famished. Any other question?
Professor, you have accidentally sent us the slides to Principles of Microeconomics instead of Labor Economics. Could you please send it whenever you're free?
No, I sent all 3 in one email. I sent Principles of Micro, I sent these labor slides, and two Principles of Macro slides and this labor slides. So check the third one.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Sir, will you send today's recordings and this slide to
Everything, I will give you everything next week. I have a Google web page, like, Google Drive, where there are so many materials for you, but I will give them to you next week once I have the final roster. The reason I'm not giving you right now is because, see, like, 17 people will not be in this class. Then they will wait. Each time I upload something, they will receive an email and they will say, Professor, can you drop me? Then I have to go and manually, one by one, I have to drop, and it becomes a really problem. So last time what I did, I added some, and then I added everyone, and then I had to drop, and then I dropped some people who were actually in the class. It made my life a living hell. I dropped people. I said, Professor, add me. And then I add people and they said, Professor, drop me. It's crazy. So I'm going to wait till I have the final sort of list and then I will add everyone. Okay. All right. So let me stop this recording and where is this recording thing? Oh, is it not recording? Yeah, it is recording. Where is that?